The Valaran diplomatic station hung in the darkness of space, like a jewel made of glass and light. And inside its gleaming halls walked creatures from 100 different worlds who had come to talk and trade, and sometimes to lie. Sergeant Park Junho stood at his post, outside the ambassador's quarters with his back straight and his eyes forward. And he had been standing this way for 6 hours, without complaint, because that was what the job required. His armor was the color of midnight, and it covered him from neck to toe. And the helmet under his arm bore scratches from 3 separate assassination attempts that he had stopped with his own. 48 months he had served as the personal guard of Ambassador Ciraval of the Kithran Collective. And in those 8 months she had never once said thank you. The door behind him slid open, and he heard the soft chiming sound that Kithrans made when they walked, like wind through crystal bells. And he did not turn around, because she had told him many times that looking at her without permission was an insult to her. Station, the meeting hall, she said in that cold voice that reminded him of winter mornings back on Earth. You will walk behind me at the proper distance. Yes, Ambassador, he said. And he fell into step 5 paces behind her as they moved through the curved corridors of the station. Ciraval was tall and thin, with skin that looked like polished glass, filled with soft blue light. And when she moved, it was like watching water flow over stones. And Junho had thought she was beautiful the first time he saw her. He did not think about that anymore. Other species moved aside as they passed, and Junho saw the looks they gave him, the fear and the disgust that so many aliens showed when they saw a human. And he kept his face empty, because showing emotion would only make things worse. Deathworlder, someone whispered as he walked by. And the word was not meant as a compliment. Humans had only joined the galactic community 15 years ago, and most species still saw them as dangerous animals who had somehow learned to build starships. And nothing Junho did seemed to change that view. The meeting hall was filled with delegates from 20 different worlds, and Ciraval took her place at a curved table, while Junho stood against the wall behind her, where guards were supposed to stand. Commander Ren Su-min had told him this assignment was an honor, a chance to show the galaxy that humans could be trusted. And Junho had believed her. He was not sure he believed that anymore. Meeting dragged on for hours as the delegates argued about trade routes and territory and all the things that powerful beings argued about. And Junho watched every shadow and every doorway, because 3 times someone had tried to kill Ciraval, and 3 times he had stopped them. The first time had been a poison in her drink that he had smelled before she could taste it, and she had looked at him with surprise, but not with thanks. Second time had been a sniper on a distant rooftop that he had spotted by the glint of light on metal, and he had thrown himself over her body and taken the shot in his shoulder plate. And she had complained about the noise. The third time had been 2 assassins in a maintenance corridor who had come at them with blades that could cut through starship hulls. And Junho had killed them both with his bare hands after they had damaged his weapon. And Ciraval had stepped over the bodies without looking at him. A Telvari delegate was speaking now about human expansion and how it needed to be contained. And Junho listened without reacting, even though the words made something cold settle in his chest. They breed too fast, the Telvari said, and they are too aggressive, and they come from a world so dangerous that it should have killed them long ago. And we must ask ourselves why we allow such creatures among us. Several delegates made sounds of agreement, and Junho saw Ciraval nod her crystalline head when the meeting ended, and they walked back to her quarters. Ciraval spoke without turning around. The Telvari delegate made valid points, she said. Your kind does not belong here among civilized species. Junho said nothing because there was nothing to say inside her quarters. A message was waiting on her console, and Junho saw her expression change as she read it. the blue light inside her skin flickering with what he had learned to recognize as worry. "There is intelligence," she said slowly. "That suggests an attack is planned during the peace summit next week. An attack aimed at multiple ambassadors, including myself. I will keep you safe," Junho said. And he meant it with every part of himself. Even though she would never believe him, Cyril turned to look at him then, and her eyes were like chips of ice floating in pale fire. "You will try," she said, "because that is what you were trained to do. But do not pretend that you care about my life, human, because I know that your kind cares about nothing but violence and survival." She turned away from him. "Leave me now. I wish to be alone." Junho walked to the door and paused there for just a moment, thinking about his sister Yuna, who had died 10 years ago when raiders had attacked their colony. Thinking about how he had sworn on her grave that he would protect others so that no one would feel the pain he had felt. "Good night, Ambassador," he said softly. And then he stepped outside to begin another long watch. The station hummed around him with the sounds of 100 different lives. And somewhere out there someone was planning death. And Junho stood ready to meet. I wondered if Cyril would ever see him as anything more than a beast in armor. He wondered if it mattered. His hand rested on his weapon, and his eyes watched the corridor, and his heart beat steady and strong in his chest. And he was a human being doing what humans had always done, standing guard against the darkness. The ship that carried them to the Ascendancy Summit was called the Eternal Grace, and it moved through the stars like a silver needle, threading black cloth. And inside its elegant corridors, Ambassador Cyril entertained guests while Junho stood in corners and tried to be invisible. 3 days they had traveled already, and each day brought new insults and new wounds that left no marks on his skin but settled. Somewhere deeper tonight there was a dinner in the main hall with delegates from 6 different species. And the conversation had turned to humans as it always seemed to do. "I still do not understand," said a Morvan diplomat whose body was covered in soft gray fur, "why the Kitharan Collective allows a human to guard one of their most important ambassadors." Cyril set down her glass, and the light inside her skin rippled with what might have been embarrassment. "It was not my choice," she said. "The humans offered protection services as part of their diplomatic efforts, and my government thought it would be a useful test." "A test of what?" asked the Morvan with amusement in his voice. "Whether a beast can learn to behave in civilized company." Laughter rippled around the table, and Junho kept his face still as stone. "They are effective," Cyril admitted, "in the way that any predator is effective. But one should not mistake efficiency for worth." "Indeed," said a Telvari delegate at the end of the table. "I have heard that human soldiers feel no fear and no pain, that they have been bred for war the way some species breed animals for meat." "That is mostly true," Cyril said. And Junho felt something crack inside his chest because she knew it was not true. She had seen him bleed and struggle and fight through pain that should have dropped him. And she knew he was not a machine, but she said nothing to defend him. "Tell me, Ambassador," the Morvan leaned forward with cruel delight in his eyes. "Does it speak when not commanded to? Or have they trained that out of their soldiers?" More laughter, and Cyril laughed with them. And the sound was like breaking glass. "They can speak," she said, "but they rarely have anything worth hearing." Junho excused himself with a small bow and walked out of the dining hall and down the corridor, until he found a viewing port where he could look out at the stars. He thought about Yunash had been 12 years old when the raiders came, and Junho had been 16 and stupid and sure that nothing bad could happen in their small colony on the edge of human space. And he had been wrong. The raiders had been Kesari pirates who saw humans as easy targets. And they had been right about that too. And by the time help arrived, half the colony was dead, and Yuna was among them. Junho had held her body in his arms and promised her that he would spend his life making sure no one else felt this loss. And he had kept that promise through 12 years of service. He had protected diplomats and civilians and soldiers. He had taken wounds that should have killed him. And he had never once complained because the pain reminded him why he fought. But tonight, the pain was different tonight. It came from words instead of weapons. And there was no armor that could stop. I heard footsteps behind him and turned to see a young Kithrin approaching. One of Cyril aides, whose name was Velthari, Sergeant Park. Velthari said quietly, "I wanted to tell you that not all of us agree with what was said in there. It does not matter." Junho said, "It does matter," Velthari insisted. "The ambassador is under great pressure, and she sometimes says things she does not mean. But that does not make it right." Junho looked at the young Kithrin and saw genuine distress in the flickering light under his skin. "Thank you," he said. "But I have a job to do, and I will do it regardless of what anyone thinks of me." Velthari nodded and left. And Junho returned to his post outside the dining hall later that night. When Cyril had returned to her quarters and the ship was quiet, Junho reviewed the security footage from the past 3 days as he always did, and he found something that made his blood run cold. There were gaps in the footage. Small ones that would have gone unnoticed if he had not been looking carefully. And when he traced the gaps, he found that they all occurred in the same place, outside the quarters of High Advisor Kethril. Cyril's most trusted advisor Junho dug deeper, accessing records that he probably should not have accessed. And what he found painted a picture that he did not want to see: secret communications with unknown parties, transfers of funds to hidden accounts, and meetings with individuals who had connections to the very groups that had tried to kill Cyril before. The threat was not coming from outside. It was coming from within her own delegation. From someone she trusted with her life. Junho sat in the darkness of his small quarters and thought about what to do if. He told Cyril she might not believe him because she thought he was nothing more than an animal. And if he accused her advisor, without proof, he might cause a diplomatic incident that would hurt humanity's standing among the stars. But if he said nothing and Kethril succeeded in his plan, Cyril would die. He thought about Yuna again, about the promise he had made. In the end, there was really no choice at all. He would tell Cyril the truth and accept whatever came after, because protecting her was more important than protecting himself. That was what humans did. That was what he did. Stars outside his window burned with ancient light. And somewhere ahead, the summit waited, and Junho prepared himself for the hardest conversation of his life. The night before the summit, Junho stood outside Cyril's door and gathered his courage like a soldier gathering weapons before battle. He had spent 2 days confirming what he had found. And now there was no doubt in his mind that High Advisor Kethril planned to have Cyril killed during tomorrow's ceremony. And the blame would fall on humans because that was part of the plan to a dead Kithrin. Ambassador and a human guard who failed to protect her would be enough to start a war. Junho knocked on the door and waited. Enter came Cyril's cold voice. Stepped inside and found her standing by the viewing port with her back to him. The light of distant stars making her crystalline skin glow with colors that had no names in human language. Ambassador, he said, I need to speak with you about a serious matter. Then speak, she said without turning around. I have little patience for interruptions tonight. Junho took a breath and told her everything. He told her about the gaps in the security footage and the secret communications and the hidden payments. And he told her that her most trusted advisor was planning to have her murdered in less than 12 hours when he finished. The silence in the room was so heavy that it pressed against his chest like a physical weight. Cyril turned slowly to face him, and the light inside her skin had turned from blue to deep purple, a color he had never seen before. You dare, she said, and her voice was barely above a whisper. You dare to accuse Kethril of treachery. I have evidence, Junho said. I can show you the records and the communications, and you can see for yourself that what I say is true. I will see nothing. Cyril stepped toward him, and her eyes blazed with fury. Because what you say is impossible. Kethrel has served my family for 60 years. He helped me when I was young. He taught me everything I know about diplomacy and honor. Ambassador, please listen to me. No, she cut him off with a sharp gesture of her hand. I have listened to enough. This is what you are. This is what all humans are. Liars and manipulators who seek to divide and conquer. I am trying to save your life. You are trying to destroy everything I trust. Cyril's voice rose until it echoed off the walls. Because that is what your kind does. You cannot build anything of worth, so you tear down what others have built. Junho stood very still and let her words wash over him like waves of poison. I know what you think of me, he said quietly. But I am telling you the truth. The truth. Cyril laughed, and it was an ugly sound. You do not know what truth means. You are a soulless weapon. A primitive creature trained to fight and kill. And you have no understanding of loyalty or honor or love. I understand more than you know. You understand nothing. She stepped closer until she was an arm's length away, and he could see himself reflected in her crystalline eyes. You are a beast in metal skin, and your protection means nothing because you have no choice in the matter. You are programmed to fight like any other primitive organism fighting for survival. Each word cut deeper than any blade. I never wanted you. Cyril continued. Your presence shames me before my people. And when I look at you, I see everything that is wrong with allowing your species into our civilization. Junho closed his eyes for a moment and thought about Yuna, thought about the promise he had made, thought about all the years he had spent trying to prove that humans were worthy of respect. And then he opened his eyes and began to remove his armor. Cyril fell silent as she watched him, unclasped the shoulder plates first and set them on the floor. Then the chest piece that had taken 3 shots meant for her heart. Then the arm guards and the leg plates, and finally the helmet that bore the scratches of so many battles. Fought in her name, when he was done, he stood before her in nothing but the simple gray uniform the humans wore beneath their armor. And he was more vulnerable than he had been in years. What are you doing? Cyril asked. And for the first time, there was something other than contempt in her voice. Junho turned his back to her, exposing himself completely, showing her that he trusted her, even though she had given him no reason to trust. Then I will no longer be your shield, he said softly. But I will not leave you to die. He walked toward the door. Where are you going? Cyril demanded. Junho paused with his hand on the door panel. To face the assassins alone, he said. Because whether you believe me or not, they are coming. And someone has to stand between you and the darkness. You will die without your armor. Maybe, Junho said. But I made a promise a long time ago that I would protect others even at the cost of my own life. And that promise did not come from training or programming. It came from love. He looked back at her one last time. Not everything that fights is a beast. Ambassador, some of us fight because we remember what it feels like to lose someone, and we cannot bear to let it happen again. Then he opened the door and stepped into the corridor, unarmed and unarmored, and began to walk toward the danger that waited in the darkness ahead. Behind him, Cyril stood frozen among the pieces of his abandoned armor. And for the first time in 8 months, she did not know what to think about the human who had sworn to protect her. The corridor was dark and quiet, and Junho moved through it like a ghost, his feet making no sound on the polished floor. Without his armor, he felt naked and exposed, but he also felt something else, something he had almost forgotten. He felt free. The weight he had carried for 8 months was gone, the weight of trying to earn respect that would never come. And now there was only the mission and the promise and the certainty that he would give everything he had to keep Cyril alive. He found the first assassin waiting at Maintenance Junction 3 levels. Below the diplomatic quarters, the assassin was Kasari, the same species that had killed Yuna all those years ago. And for a moment, Junho felt old rage rise up in his chest, like fire. But he pushed it down because rage made you stupid, and stupid got you killed. Duh. Kasari saw him and smiled with too many teeth. The human guard. It said, "And without his armor, how generous of you to make this easy." Junho did not answer with words. He answered with his fists. The fight was brutal and fast, and when it was over, the Kasari lay on the floor with its neck bent at an angle that meant it would never rise again. And Junho had a deep cut across his ribs that bled freely onto his gray uniform. He kept moving. The second and third assassins found him together in a cargo bay. And they were Telvari with long arms and longer blades. And they circled him like predators who had found wounded prey. Kethrol said you might cause trouble, one of them said. He said humans do not know when to quit. He was right about that. Junho said they came at him from both sides and their blades whistled through the air. And Junho ducked and weaved and struck back with everything he had. And the cargo bay echoed with the sounds of combat. One blade caught his shoulder and another sliced across his thigh. And the pain was a living thing that screamed through his nerves. But pain was an old friend, and he knew how to work through it. Broke one Telvari's arm and used its own blade to finish the fight. And when the second came at him with fury in its eyes, he met it head on, and they crashed into a stack of cargo containers together by the time he walked out of that cargo bay. Both Telvari were dead, and Junho was leaving a trail of blood behind him that anyone could follow. But he kept moving in her quarters. Ciravel had activated the security feeds, and what she saw made the light inside. Her skin flicker with emotions she could not name. The human was wounded. Badly wounded, blood soaking through his uniform in at least 4 places. And still he fought. She watched him face a Morven assassin in a narrow corridor and take a blow to the face that should have knocked him unconscious. But he only staggered back and then came forward again with his hands raised. She watched him break the Morven's weapon and then break the Morven hand. Still he kept moving toward the summit hall where she knew the final attack was planned. Why? She asked herself. Why does he keep fighting? She looked at the pieces of his armor scattered across her floor. And she remembered what he had said about promises and love and losing someone. She accessed the ship's communication system. "This is Ambassador Ciravel," she said. "There are assassins aboard this vessel, and they are being hunted by my bodyguard. I need security teams dispatched immediately." Then she did something she had never done before. She picked up one of the human weapons that Junho had left behind, and she went to help. Junho reached the summit hall with his vision blurring and his legs threatening to give out beneath him. And he found High Advisor Kethrol waiting there with a weapon in his hand and hatred in his eyes. "You should have stayed out of this." "Human," Kethrol said. "Now I will have to kill you before I kill her." "You will try," Junho said. And even though his voice was weak from blood lost, there was iron beneath it. They faced each other across the empty hall where tomorrow the leaders of 100 worlds would gather for peace. "Why you care so much?" Kethrol asked with genuine curiosity. "She has treated you like dirt for 8 months. She has mocked you and dismissed you and never once showed you gratitude. Why would you die for someone like that?" Junho smiled and blood stained his teeth. "Because that is not why I protect her," he said. "I protect her because everyone deserves someone willing to stand between them and harm. Even people who do not believe they need protection. Even people who hate their protectors." Kethrol raised his weapon. "Sentimental foolishness." "Maybe," Junho said. "But it is human foolishness, and that is the only kind I know." Kethrol fired. Junho was already moving, diving to the side even as the energy blast scorched through the air where he had been standing. And he rolled across the floor and came up running toward the traitor with nothing but his bloody hands and his unbreakable will. The second shot caught him in the stomach, and he felt his insides turn to fire. But he did not stop. He crashed into Kethril, and they went down together. And his hands found the advisors' throat as everything started to go dark around the edges of his vision. The doors burst open and Cyril stood there with her weapon raised as security teams flooding in behind her. And she saw Junho collapse on top of the unconscious Kethril with blood pooling beneath both of them. "Medic," she screamed, and her voice cracked with an emotion she had never allowed herself to feel. "I need a medic now." She ran to Junho and dropped to her knees beside him and lifted his head into her lap. And his eyes fluttered open, and he looked up at her with something like peace in his expression. "Told you," he whispered. They were coming. Then his eyes closed and his body went still. And Cyril held him and waited for help to arrive, and for the first time since she was young, she prayed. The medical bay was quiet, except for the soft beeping of machines that monitored the human's vital signs. And Cyril sat beside his bed and watched him breathe. Days he had been unconscious, while the doctors worked to repair the damage that should have killed him 10 times over. And 3 days she had barely left his side. The other delegates whispered about it. The proud Kithran ambassador, keeping vigil over her human bodyguard. But she did not care what they whispered anymore. She had spent those 3 days reading about humans. She read about Earth. That impossible world of crushing gravity and violent weather and predators that would be nightmares on any other planet. And she learned that humans had not just survived there, but thrived. She read about human history. The wars and the plagues and the disasters that should have wiped them out 100 times. And she learned that they had faced every challenge with the same stubborn refusal to surrender that she had seen in Junho. She read about human soldiers, about the bonds they formed with those they protected, about the concept they called duty that went beyond orders and training to something almost sacred. And she read about a colony called New Haven that had been attacked by Khazari raiders 15 years ago, and about a 16-year-old boy who had survived and joined the military the day he was old enough and had spent his entire adult life protecting others. She was reading when Junho finally opened his eyes. "Ambassador," he said, and his voice was rough and weak, but there was recognition in his gaze. "You are awake," she said, and she was surprised to find that she was smiling. "The doctors said you would recover, but they also said it was impossible that you survived at all. Humans are stubborn," Junho said with a ghost of his old humor. "I am beginning to understand that." They sat in silence for a moment, and then Cyril did something that had been building inside her for 3 days. "I am sorry," she said, and the words felt strange in her mouth because she had not said them to anyone in many years. "For everything I said and everything I did and everything I failed to see." Junho turned his head to look at her fully. "Ambassador, please," she held up her hand. "Let me finish, because I have been practicing this, and I need to say it all." He nodded and waited. "I called you a beast and a weapon and a soulless creature," Cyril said. "And I was wrong about all of it. I watched you fight through 6 assassins with wounds that would have killed any member of my species. And I saw no beast." She paused to gather herself. "I saw someone who had every reason to let me die, and chose instead to give everything for someone who had given him nothing but contempt. And I do not understand how anyone could call that behavior primitive. I made a promise," Junho said quietly. "A long time ago. Tell me about it," Cyril said. "Tell me about Yuna." His eyes widened slightly. "You know about her." "I have spent 3 days learning everything I could about the human who saved my life," Cyril said. "I think I owed you at least that much." So Junho told her about his little sister who loved to sing and who wanted to be a teacher, and about the day the raiders came and how he had hidden her in a closet and promised to come back for her, and how when he came back the closet was empty and there was blood on the floor. He told her about the funeral where there was nobody to bury, and about the promise he made on her empty grave, that he would spend his life standing between the innocent and those who would harm them. Told her that every time he protected someone, he was keeping his promise to Una when he finished. Cyril reached out and took his hand in hers, and her crystalline fingers wrapped around his battered human ones. "I cannot undo the things I said," she told him, "but I can try to be worthy of what you did for me. You do not owe me anything. I owe you everything," Cyril said firmly, "and I intend to start repaying that debt today." 1 week later, when Junho was strong enough to stand, he walked into the great hall of the Ascendancy Summit with Ambassador Cyril at his side, not behind her, not at the proper distance at her side. The delegates of 100 worlds watched as Cyril approached the central podium and addressed the assembly. "I come before you today to speak about humanity," she said, and her voice carried to every corner of the vast hall. "I know what many of you think of them, because I thought the same things once. I thought they were primitive and violent, and incapable of the higher virtues that we pride ourselves on." She paused and looked at Junho. "I was wrong." She told him what had happened, about the assassination plot and the traitor, and the human soldier who had removed his armor after her cruelest words, and walked into certain death to save someone who had given him nothing but contempt. "That is not the behavior of a beast," Cyril said. "That is not the action of a soulless weapon. That is love, the deepest kind of love, the kind that asks nothing in return and gives everything it has." She lifted her chin and met the eyes of the assembled delegates. "I declare before this assembly that humans are among the most honorable beings I have ever known, and the Kitharan Collective is proud to call them allies." Later, on the observation deck of the Eternal Grace, Junho stood looking out at the stars with Cyril beside him. He was wearing his armor again, newly repaired and polished to a shine. "Why do you wear it now?" Cyril asked. "You told me your strength comes from within." Junho smiled, and it was the first real smile he had shown her in 8 months of service. "The armor is not for me," he said. "It is so my enemies think they have a chance." Cyril laughed, a sound like crystal bells ringing in clear air, and Junho decided it was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. They stood together in comfortable silence as the stars wheeled past. Two beings from different worlds who had found understanding in the most unlikely of places, and somewhere far away, in a part of his heart that he kept only for her. Junho hoped that Una was watching. He hoped she knew that he had kept his promise. He hoped she was proud.